Hi everyone, Jonathan here from Connex Carrier Services. This talk is entitled Calculating VoIP Call Metrics. We'll look at some metrics, how they are calculated, and how they relate to each other. The first metric is answer seizure ratio. This is the ratio between calls placed and calls answered. It's expressed as a percentage. One thing to note about ASR is it doesn't distinguish between calls to invalid numbers or provider failures. If you want to isolate that more accurately, take a look at NER, or Network Effectiveness Ratio. I'll post a topic about this later. Next we have ACD, which is average call duration. The total duration in seconds divided by the total connected calls. This will give you a figure that's measured in seconds. Some providers don't use connected calls, they use total call attempts. This lowers the overall ACD metric that you'll have. I personally don't think this is a good idea because it convolutes the metrics between ASR and ACD. PDD is post-dial delay. It is the amount of time after you dial a number until you hear the ringing sound. On a slightly more technical level, it's the difference between when you send the invite and when you receive a 180 or 183 ringing response. Now typically, if you're dealing with a landline route on tier 1, your PDD will be less than a second. If you're dialing on mobile routes or you've got tier 2 or 3 connectivity, it can take quite a bit longer. Ring time is obvious, we don't need to talk too much about this. It's how long the phone rings before it is answered. So that's the time difference between the 183 and the 200. Channels or ports. This is the amount of connected calls at any one particular time. This normally includes pre-establishment or the pre-teardown phase, so calls which are ringing will be included in this. Lower level telecoms may consider a call consisting of two channels, that's an audio component out and an audio component in. For the purposes of this, we're going to consider that a single call is the same as a single channel. CPS stands for calls per second. It's also used in the telecoms industry as carrier pre-select. Sometimes you may also hear calls per second represented as CAPS, CAPS, which is call attempts per second. It is important to note there's also a difference between average calls per second and peak calls per second. A customer may send 10 calls per second on average, but they may peak at over 100. This is something to watch out for. All of these metrics measure different aspects of either individual calls or the overall call profile. They're not dependent on each other, however changing one can affect the others. For example, if ACD is increased, channels could increase, or the CPS would be decreased in order to keep the metrics the same. So these metrics all bear some relationship with each other, and because of that, if we have any missing, we can find out the others. So to make things easier, we're going to simplify our model. We will ignore calls which ring but don't connect. Also, to avoid any confusion in advance, we'll be representing ASR as a decimal, not a percentage. This means that you'll need to divide it by 100 to begin with. Once you understand these basic equations, it will be quite easy to make a more comprehensive model by incorporating more data. So we're going to calculate the channels given all of the other metrics. We can split our calls into two sections, ones which do connect and ones which don't. So the ones that do connect, we're going to look at how many calls are being placed. To figure that one out, we can get the ASR and multiply that by the calls per second. Then, for that same group of connected calls, we also want to find out the duration. The duration of these calls is going to be the average call duration plus the post-dial delay plus the ring time. This will give us the total channel occupancy. Then we'll look at the calls that don't connect. To find that out, we simply do ASR minus 1 times by the calls per second. The duration occupied is just going to be the post-dial delay. To continue to calculate the channels, we'll put all of that together. So we've got our ASR times by calls per second, and then we multiply all of that by the total channel occupancy time, which is the ACD plus PDD plus ring time. would do the exact same thing for the calls that don't connect. If we put all of that together, we have this full equation. I'm not going to bother reading this out, but I'll give you a moment to read it on the screen. To simplify that equation, we can put it in this form. This is just a bit of basic algebra. So now we're going to calculate the calls per second. We could find this out in a similar way, or we could transform the equation in terms of CPS. For this one, we'll use first principles again. So now we're going to calculate the calls per second. We'll look at the amount of connected calls and we split those into two. First off, the calls that are connected and the calls which are not connected. We're using a similar calculation as before, basically splitting the ASR. Then we'll join it together. Now, as you can probably see, these equations look fairly similar to the one before. I'm not going to bother reading this out in full, but I'll give you a moment to read it yourself. Now, to find out some other metrics, we could start from the beginning again, but it's much easier to use the tools at our disposal. One of the best for algebraic equation manipulation is Wolfram Alpha. Now, Wolfram Alpha deals with algebra. So what we're going to do, we'll change each of our channels, ASR, CPS, PDD, ring time, and ACD metrics into individual letters, represented by C, S, P, D, R, and A. Then we'll put our equation in for solving channels into Wolfram Alpha with the word solve written in front of it, and we want to solve this for A. So A is our ACD. Wolfram Alpha calculates the equation, putting it in terms of A, and now we can see that we've been presented with a new equation. So for calculating ASR, this is the equation that we're given. And for ACD, now there's other ways to write this equation that might be a little bit more graceful than this, a little bit easier to read, but ultimately what I wanted to show you in this video is how these metrics link together, how you can use tools such as Wolfram Alpha to help you calculate them, and this can be used to provide consistency. If somebody gives you your ACD, ASR, channels, you can find out the calls per second, or if they give you the calls per second as well, you can see if things really do add up. Thanks for watching this video. I hope to post some more. If you want to contact me, my email address is jhume@connexcs.com.